Yesterday, a Blue Origin rocket exploded in the sky over Texas. This is not just another space incident. This is a scene where Jeff Bezos, a man whose fortune rivals the budgets of some countries, publicly loses the race to another man whose fortune is already greater than the budgets of those countries. That's why I suggest that today you don't just skim through this news, but take a moment to focus on it. Because the explosion in Boca Chica, Texas is important not as an explosion, but as a turning point. What happened? In short, the facts are that the Blue Origin rocket, Jeff Bezos' project, lost control on one of the key stages of the mission and was destroyed on command from the ground. The cargo was lost. No one was hurt. According to various estimates, this is the fourth or possibly the fifth serious incident at Blue Origin in the past 2 years. Meanwhile, it's also the first to occur alongside another successful SpaceX launch. 2 launches, 2 companies, 2 owners, the same vast sky, and fundamentally different results. The question immediately arises, why? Bezos has invested between $20 and $30 billion in Blue Origin over the past 6 years, according to various estimates. Musk has invested a comparable amount over the same period. But Blue Origin has not yet reached full commercial operation, and SpaceX carries out a launch every few days. It services the ISS, transports astronauts, puts thousands of Starlink satellites into orbit, and has already caught the first stage back on the launch pad several times. And this is where the main story begins. And gentlemen, it's not about the hardware. The state became the client. 20 years ago, serious conversations about rockets were held in 2 places in the world, the offices of NASA and the offices of Roscosmos. Today, they happen in the offices of 2 private companies. This is a change of era. It's not private companies assisting the government, but the government actually becoming their client. Today, NASA buys flights from SpaceX, just like the Pentagon buys airplanes from Boeing. The old model, the government builds, the private sector serves. That has been completely flipped. The new model, the private sector builds, and the government pays for it and uses it. And now here's the most interesting part. This new model has split itself from within. Not government versus private sector, but private sector versus private sector. Musk versus Bezos. And this is the second internal duel. It's happening between 2 people, each of whom has more personal money than, I don't know, any European space program. Elon Musk's fortune is around, I think, maybe even over $400 billion. And with the current growth rate of shares in SpaceX and Tesla, and also XAI, many analysts are already talking about $1 trillion during his lifetime. Bezos, well, he has only about $250 billion. He got divorced, gave away $30 billion, maybe $35. Well, that's it. Yeah, that's nothing. $250 billion. For comparison, the annual military budget of the United Kingdom is $70 billion. Well, the annual federal budget of Poland, and they've been very serious about war there, for obvious reasons, is about $120 billion. In other words, today, one person has more free capital than an entire country. And he can direct this capital toward a single goal, without a parliament, without a coalition, without elections, toward a goal that he himself chooses. This is a new phenomenon. Not in the sense that billionaires have always existed. No, they haven't. Not on this scale, not with this concentration, not with this speed of turnover. Back in the 19th century, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, if you convert it to today's money, those were large fortunes. But Morgan didn't have the free resources to build his own nuclear program. Carnegie didn't have the money to build his own spaceport and pay for it. To pay for it. That's already 2,000 jobs every day for 20 years without a single penny of profit. But Musk and Bezos have that. That's exactly why I suggested we focus on this news today. Competition with governments. When a private individual has more free capital than an average country, that person isn't just richer than a country, that person starts to compete with it. With governments in those arenas where governments are used to having the field to themselves. Space is one of those platforms. Launching a satellite is another. Providing internet access in a war zone is a third. Well, remember Starlink over Ukraine, which, by the way, changed the course of military actions, and the decision about this access was made by one person. Will I allow it or not? Do I want to or not? Not Congress. One person. Artificial intelligence is the fourth. The electrical grid in developing countries. Fifth. This isn't about good or bad, it's about what exists. Here's what exists. For the first time in history, a class of people has emerged to leave the state far behind, in horse racing terms by 3 lengths, in terms of decision-making speed, resource concentration, and risk-taking ability. For the state to launch a program, it has to go through a political cycle. Right now, a private individual of that scale doesn't have to. He just sits down, thinks, gets up, goes, and starts doing. Now we're coming back to the rocket that blew up. Why did the rocket crash? The thesis that's now being carefully discussed in the industry goes like this. Maybe the problem with Blue Origin isn't an engineering one, which is most likely the case. Maybe the problem is that the concentration of capital on such a scale, which has never existed before, paradoxically doesn't help but actually gets in the way. What, you might ask? What are you talking about here? When a company has no financial limits, well, Blue Origin basically doesn't, because Bezos signs the checks himself, without a board of directors, without a bank, without outside investors, the company doesn't face any financial constraints. Every mistake can be covered. Every decision can be postponed, every deadline can be pushed back, and that's why it's slower, more complicated, more expensive, and as it turns out now, worse. SpaceX, on the other hand, has been working for years under pressure from a cash crunch. Musk said, and this is documented, that there were times when SpaceX only had enough money for one launch. If it had failed, the company wouldn't exist. That pressure made SpaceX disciplined. Every decision went through a filter, otherwise we'd die. Do you want to end up, as they say, out on the street without a job? Go ahead. Blue Origin didn't have that filter, and that's probably its main weakness. It reminds me of the so-called paradox of oil-rich countries, or the oil curse. Countries that had a huge amount of oil and could exist mainly or exclusively because oil was being pumped from the ground, and all they had to do was just sit there and, do nothing, right? Foreigners came, built everything, set everything up, everything is running. Then we looked and thought, they're giving us too little money, so they gave us more. But we never learned to do anything ourselves. We got out of the habit of doing things, forgot how to do them, never knew how to do them at all. So now we see a paradox of capital that has never been observed in history. Unlimited money makes things worse, not better, because there's no struggle for survival. That's why I support the idea that the American currency should lose its status. Of course, I don't want some other currency to take on this role. If I have to choose between them, I'd rather pick the American one, but I'd prefer if there was none at all. Why? For a very simple reason. Because we can solve many problems not by improving production, not by technological breakthroughs, but simply because we can print any amount of dollar bills for 1/100th of their value, and everyone else, in order to get these bills, has to work hard. They have to extract oil or build an airplane or do something else like grow potatoes, right? Sell it and get $100. But what about us? How much did we invest there? Like 27 or 30 cents, 37 cents as we used to say. And this new one, this $100 bill, it costs 37 cents to make. I'm afraid this could lead to the same consequences as the company. So Bezos, which was financed, endlessly financed, all sorts of space projects and things like that, without responsibility and without fear that everything could end tomorrow. This hypothesis is being discussed behind closed doors today, and this hypothesis is backed by statistics. It's not at all by chance that SpaceX overtook Blue Origin despite comparable investments. Not at all by chance. Musk works in a mode that he himself called production hell, and Bezos works at a more gradual pace. One approach enforces discipline while the other relaxes it. What does this mean? First, the state, as a player in space, is shifting to the role of regulator and client. NASA doesn't build on its own anymore. NASA buys, but that's already a fact. It's begun. And this same model will spread to other areas in the coming years where the state used to dominate. Ladies and gentlemen, telecommunications, heavy transport infrastructure, and defense, what Galambus wrote about. Defense, that too, not everywhere and not immediately, but the trend is moving in that direction. If a private company can do it better, cheaper, more efficiently, and we can buy from them. All right, there will be more talks about this, because people are even afraid to put the fire department in private hands, private competition between billionaires. It replaces interstate competition, where countries used to compete before. The space race of the 20th century was Moscow versus Washington. And the space race of the 21st century is Musk and Bezos. Musk and Bezos, but wait, they're both U.S. citizens, yes. But their companies operate in Europe, Asia, and Africa as well. That means whether a given country wins or loses. In the technology race, it depends less and less on what kind of program the government has, and more on whether the country has the right to use the services of these private companies. And under what conditions. Bezos could build a weapon that everyone would want to have. He could sell it to one, but not to another. If they pressure him in Washington, he'll move to Africa and build a capital there. The concentration of capital at the level of such a weapon creates a fundamentally new negotiating position between a private individual and the state. When Bezos has enough money to build an alternative space program, no measure, directed personally against Bezos works. Bezos looks at this closely and then gets on his 24 private planes and flies away. He can change jurisdictions. He can simply fund a political campaign that will change the regulations. Musk does the same. It's not just about Bezos. The same applies to the next 5 to 7 people who will reach this financial level in the next decades. AIs are already working on this, moving forward. Look at them. Fourth, the future of private programs doesn't depend on who has more money, although Musk has more money than Bezos, but it's only somewhat more, right? It depends on who has more discipline with that kind of money. That's a very rare combination. Big money usually erodes discipline. That's exactly the pattern that, as they believe now, was illustrated by the Blue Origin explosion. SpaceX is the exception to the rule. Will there be other exceptions? Well, that's a question for the coming years. We'll see. And fifth, if Musk really reaches $1 trillion, which, according to analysts, is a likely scenario in the next few years, for the first time in modern history, there will be a private individual with more available capital than any country in the world. Well, maybe except for a few of the largest ones, but it's not even clear if the U.S. has that much available capital. That's not just a billionaire anymore. This is a whole new category. And the world where something like this appears somehow requires new words. The old words, capitalist, magnate, oligarch, are too small for what we're seeing now. The good news today is that the new era, the era in which space, communications, and heavy technology are increasingly falling into the hands of competing private companies. This is an era of competition, not monopolies. Blue Origin lost today's launch, but they're not out of the race. SpaceX won today's launch, but they haven't closed the market. As observers, you have, well, you're watching this race, right? You have, well, the best seat in the house that spectators of technological history have ever had. And in the end, it's up to us. The decision is up to each of us, and it's a very simple one. To buy bread from Company A or Company B, to rent car N or car R. One person will choose it because it's blue, another because it's cheap, a third because it's spacious, and a fourth just because he was too lazy to think and took whatever he saw first. And that's perfectly fine. As long as they're not forcing anything on us, I'm absolutely not against a monopoly that is formed naturally when we're offered the best product at the best prices with the best service, right? Why would I need, a product with worse service, worse price, worse quality, and a higher price? But as soon as the monopoly, so to speak, starts doing worse, becomes more expensive, with bad service, immediately 10 young predators appear who will try to take a bite out of it. Well, a piece of the market, of course, not from it directly, right? Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for today. I got a bit distracted from our main topics, but they're generally related. Let's make it to Monday, and then things will be, well, absolutely wonderful.